back once again with my show, Bitcoin is Freedom. And I think I've got a good show lined up. But before that, let me tell you a little bit about the sponsor, Roundly X. If you know, a lot of times we use our debit cards and our credit cards and we go shop and buy stuff with it. But how great would it be if you could round up those purchases in that little roundup piece, rather it be 50 cents, rather it be 75 cents, hey, rather it be 90 cents, that gets rounded up in sats. And so what Roundly X does, they make it super simple, super easy for you to do that. You can just go along your regular day, buying like you normally do, and those sats are going to start stacking. And you know that's what we like to do, is stack sats. So our sponsor, Roundly X, is making that possible. Guess what? You can actually get $4 in Bitcoin if you use Bitcoin is Freedom as the little code, and they're going to give you $4. So please go check out Roundly X. They're sponsoring this show.
Here we go.
Let's get started.
All right, folks. Hey, listen, as I said, I've got a phenomenal show lined up for you. As most of you know, we've been talking about CBDCs a lot. We did the last time I had the show, and this is going to be a continuation of that conversation because there's so much going on with them. And it's one of those things that we have to keep asking that question, whether we have a CBDC or not. And so for today's show, I want to have two of the best people join me to have this conversation. Of course, Nick, our producer, is going to be coming in, and also StyledPigeon. If you've ever followed us on Twitter, you know we have tons of conversations about CBDC. So, hey guys, how you doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm doing great, man. Can't wait to hear a little bit more. It's actually, I've been so busy doing a couple other projects that I haven't been able to follow the news on CBDCs. So this is kind of half update, half input for me.
It's going to be a great one. Trust me, there's a lot of stuff going on with CBDCs. At first, I thought, wow, this is a slow month for CBDCs. But as I started digging in, I was like, oh, there's some interesting things going on. So, yeah, so it's going to be an interesting, free-flowing conversation about this. And so, Nick, that next slide, that's sort of my October recap. We're almost, we got another week left in October. So an October recap. But one of the things that surfaced through my curation of information this month was to CB, they say, what is the question? To CBDC or not is the question. Well, this quote right here from Christopher J. Waller, who is one of the Fed governors. He's one of the 12 Fed governors. This is what he said, and I want to read through this a little bit, and then I want to try and get both Nick's and StyledPigeon's view on this. He says, advocates for a CBDC tend to promote the potential for a CBDC to reduce payment friction by lowering transaction costs, enabling faster settlement speeds, and providing a better user experience. He said, I am highly skeptical that a CBDC on its own could sufficiently reduce the traditional payment friction to prevent things like fraud, theft, money laundering, or the financing of terrorism. Now, if you go to the next slide, this was his continuation of this statement. He says, though CBDC system may be able to automate a number of processes that in part address these challenges, they are not unique in doing so. Meaningful efforts are underway at the international level to improve cross-border payments in many ways, with the vast majority of these improvements coming not from CBDCs, but improvements to existing payment systems. This is a Fed governor saying this. So a lot of people are fearful that, the Fed's going to issue a CBDC. I'm not so sure. What do you guys think?
I mean, my initial thought is so the problem is that the Fed is technically a business, right? They're a business that's very highly integrated with the U.S. government, but they're a separate entity altogether. So it's kind of, in my opinion, if a CBDC comes around, they do have a vested interest in preventing that to some extent. Because if you shut down the mint altogether, then the Fed starts to be an odd organization for the federal government to be so involved with. So from you being a salesperson, that's just my first observation based on his statements. I don't blame him, and I hope he continues pushing it that direction, but that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Pigeon just said.
they are in a way they're like a competitor with the U.S. government itself, right? So the central banking system is, like you said in the previous show, a public-private enterprise, and this could potentially be like interpreted like a power grab. And I also agree with Christopher Waller that many of these things are actually solved in the private sector, or in the traditional financial sector already, right? So many of these issues are not particularly issues in themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is only one voice of the other Fed governors that's saying this. But in addition to that, if you go to the next slide, Nick, I want to look at legislation. And as you guys know, on my Bitcoin and Politics show, I look at a lot of the legislation. Thanks to Cap Hill Crypto for making it easy for me to do that. But these are two articles that came out this week talking about CBDCs. The first one is about a U.S. senator that's introducing a bill that prohibits the government from eliminating cash when CBDC is created, and then Republican lawmakers who oppose a Fed-issued CBDC asking the Justice Department for their assessment. And so this is really incredible. So if you go to one more slide, we'll take a look at that senator's bill. Now, this senator is James Lanford from Oklahoma. He's a Republican. He doesn't have any co-sponsors on this bill, and I would love to get Cap Hill Crypto's viewpoint, George's viewpoint on that as to if this matters, if it has sponsors or co-sponsors or not. But this is what it says for the No Digital Dollar Act, which is a Senate Act of Bill 4994. It says it prohibits the Federal Reserve from discontinuing the use of paper currency and coins if a CBDC is issued. It prohibits a CBDC from being legal tender. And you're going to hear some other language and further this brief. But I find this, again, interesting. And again, back to you guys. I know we've talked on Twitter a lot, and everybody, especially in the media and crypto, it seems like we're stoking this fear about a CBDC being issued and them having control of us. But you can see right here, one of the senators at least is saying, hey, time out. No, we're not playing that game, not with CBDCs. So what do you guys think about that?
I think that's very positive. That there are senators out there who actually are informed and are pushing back on this. And I think one of the ways to sort of mitigate the danger of CBDCs, apart from very strict regulation and not allowing direct accounts with the Fed itself, is of course also allowing for cash and other means of payment, and also to create a free market of private companies who can also issue their own currencies or cryptocurrencies. But I think that's probably a long way off.
I'd have to agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm kind of with Nick on this one. I'm seeing some things now, thanks to you, actually. So thank you for doing this for everybody, Paul. What I look at when I think about societal level issues is actually faith. To what degree do people have faith in the system that they're beholden to? And how does that affect what's going to happen in the future? And things like this are what help me keep my faith sort of above water when it comes to government. When I see people like Waller or Senator Langford speaking back in some doubt as far as these technological advances happen, I just look to hear both voices, right? If I can hear both voices, I'm confident that the best will win out. That's how forums typically operate, right? Which is why we have the Senate in the US. That's why we have the legislature bodies that we do, is so that they can have these conversations at length and make good decisions ultimately. So if they keep doing their research and keep looking into this in a way that's, how do we properly represent our constituency, then I'm all gravy with it. I'm totally okay with them looking deeper into this. And you actually said something that bothered me a little bit, Paul. That's I'm afraid that maybe sometimes I'm guilty personally of doing some fear mongering around CBDCs, and that's definitely not the perspective that I actually want to portray. So let me clarify that. I'm not afraid of CBDCs. I'm afraid that CBDCs and federal governmental power will get out of control. And because I kind of know what happens when that takes place, and that's what I want to avoid. So I don't want everyone to be afraid. I just want everyone to be aware, which is why, of course, we're doing all of this as well.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a little bit different in that regard. I do fear mongering when it comes to CBDCs because I inherently distrust them, because I think they just give too much power, and I totally appreciate the pushback by senators and Congress and Senate and people who are looking at this closely. I'm also okay with them studying it because it's out there anyway, so why not? But I hope they come to the conclusion that they don't go down this path ever, because it's like a sliding scale, right? As soon as you go down this scale, I mean, we have seen with fiat, it starts off okay with King Dollar and a sort of neutrality, that every government or every nation on earth can use the dollar in any which way they want. And then with time progresses, it becomes more and more weaponized, basically, which is what's happened. And also it gets totally out of control with debt issues and mismanagement issues. So let alone if that happens with fiat standards, I don't want to see what happens with the CBDC standards.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Go ahead, Paul. Sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Go ahead, Sal.
Okay, Nick, I was actually wanted to ask you a question about all this, because me and Paul kind of talk about this from the U.S.'s perspective, but not being in the U.S. What's the sentiment as far as globally people watching U.S. politics and watching us actually dig into this? Is it kind of one of those things where it's like, okay, we're watching to see what the U.S. does, not to necessarily inform us, but because we know that it'll affect things on a global scale that way? Is that kind of the perspective, or is there something else there that I'm missing?
No, that's exactly how we look at the US, at least from Europe's perspective. I don't know, if you're in China or in East Asia, if there's like a different way to look at it, or from Russia. But generally speaking, America or the US is like the trendsetter, and they're sort of giving a green light to something. It's basically it's gonna go ahead and become a sort of standard everywhere. But in the case of CBDCs and this whole control grid, I actually see other countries outpacing the US by miles, right? I mean, even the European Union is way ahead when it comes to CBDCs and this kind of stuff than the US. And I think the US has, in this case, a sort of very, a luxury position, because they can sort of take their time and see how it works out in different places before, if they want to roll it out in America itself.
We do tend to be pretty conservative with our finances over
here. That's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
I agree.
And that's one of the things that I think is going to become clearer as we go through the show, is that just like Bitcoin is different than everything else, right? I think the US is different than all the other countries, and you're going to see why as we keep looking at this. But the next slide highlights the reason why I'm saying this. And so from another article that came out this week, coining money became the topic, right? And I'm going to read through this again so you can see. So we've got the governor, one of them, saying we're not all excited about the CBDC. You've got Langford, who's saying, hey, pump the brakes. We don't necessarily want this way. Now you look at two other lawmakers. These happen to both be Republican lawmakers, Representative Patrick McHenry and Representative French Hill. They believe that the Fed doesn't have the authority necessary to issue a CBDC. So here in the U.S., again, we're seeing that the U.S. is not like the rest of these other countries. It says, as you know, Congress's authority over coining money is exclusive. The Supreme Court has recognized Congress's power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, confirming Congress's authority to regulate each phase of currency. Repeatedly, Congress may charter banks and grant them the right to issue circulating notes, and it may retain the circulation of notes not issued under its own authority. Again, here you go. You have it. As you mentioned earlier, Nick, it is a public-private partnership between the Fed and the government of the United States. And it right there talks about how the Supreme Court has said Congress is the only one who has the power to coin this money. The Fed is being told what to do because they're a private company. They don't don't get the option, not federal by any stretch of the imagination. And so we have to keep recognizing that in order for the US to actually issue a CBDC the way some of these other countries have, the hurdle to jump that is enormous. So while we're concerned about if the US will ever become a surveillance state with its CBDC, I don't think it's going to get away with that. I don't think it's possible because there's going to be pushback.
I certainly hope not. My lack of faith about this stuff typically stems from what I see other unelected federal power bodies actually do. So that's where I'm kind of, when I think about the CIA, the FBI, the FAA, all of the entities that have federal power backed by non-voted on people who are in those offices. Granted, most of them are appointed, from what I understand. So it's kind of 6 in one, half dozen in the other in some way. But non-voted people doesn't scream democracy to me. But those are just my reservations. I'm not necessarily like freaking out yet.
Yeah, and I think also there's also something else going on because the US, through the traditional financial system, by means of the dollar, has enormous influence on what other countries do and don't do. And also the IMF is basically also, in a way, an arm of the US to sort of influence things around the world. And so I really wonder sometimes if the policies that other countries develop and put into practice aren't, sort of put into practice on advice of the US, right? Via those kind of institutions. So they can sort of sit back and see what happens in those countries as sort of like as a test garden. So they can wait to see what comes out of those tests and then implement them at home. And also they can use the same sort of excuse and say like, oh my God, China is building a CBDC. Now we must build one too, right? So you've got this sort of game theory thing that they can set in motion. If they say all the world is building CBDCs, then we have to build one too, right? So, but through the back door, they might actually be influencing the direction the world takes in that sense.
Right.
Yeah, never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
Exactly. On the next slide, I do have the curation of those articles. The first one is actually the article where I pull that quote and that information from. But the next two, of course, this is where the switch happened. So I gave you guys you can stay on the other slide, where I gave you guys sort of the pushback, but there is also a push to move toward a CBDC. The Atlantic Council, we actually have had a conversation with him on Twitter, Josh Lipinski, I think that's how you pronounce his name, maybe it's Lipinski. Yes, Lipsky, Josh Lipsky. And I think we all have had a conversation with him because I tweeted to him from one of the things that he said. But the Atlantic Council, they are looking at the splintering of the financial system, and they're saying the U.S. might fall behind on CBDCs. According to him, toward the end of the article that's mentioned right there, it says in the next 2 years, the U.S. could build a CBDC model that is cyber secure, protects privacy, and delivers near instant settlement. And that's what Josh said. And could even be the international standard setter, promoting other countries to follow suit, which is what you guys were just talking about, what Nick was talking about. And then I'll say this last piece and I'll let you guys chime in. It says, we're the dollar. We're the issuer of the world's reserve currency, and other countries that are in a further state of CBDC development would say to themselves, well, we should probably be aligned with what the US and what the ECB is doing. So again, as you were mentioning, I think that other countries will eventually, even though they're far ahead of us with this whole CBDC business, they still have to look back to the US and say, hey, that's the global reserve currency. What are you guys going to do? Because you guys are going to have a play in the say and so deal. So yeah. So I don't know if you guys have any comment. Again, I would love to get Josh on the show. I don't know if he'll bite and take it.
Well, and I think, even if you take it from that perspective, then it also makes sense for other countries to sort of ask the US to also create a CBDC in order to link up their CBDCs to the US CBDC, purely from a practical standpoint, right? So then the US will have to oblige those other countries to build a CBDC to do that.
Yep. And the beautiful thing is the next article there is talking about this billionaire, Frank, I guess is Gustra. I think that's where you pronounce his name. He's the CEO of an investment management firm, Fiora Group, and he has suggested that the growth of Bitcoin poses a significant threat to the existing fiat money system, while noting that regulators are willing to go the extra mile to contain any competition. So I think he's saying that, and he goes on and says that even posing a threat to the possible establishment of a CBDC by the jurisdiction like the United States. He does have a quote. Now, again, I'll read this one. He's going to create their own central bank digital currency like everybody else in the world, meaning the US, and they're not going to want competition. I see Bitcoin as an anti-sovereign fiat play. And if I am right about monetary reset, where everybody's going to something else that incorporates digital currencies in whatever they create, the last thing they're going to want is the competition for Bitcoin. So I think he sees a lot of pressure coming and fight coming to Bitcoin as a result. But again, I think that as much as all this fighting happens, Bitcoin is still going to win out. That's just my personal view.
I wouldn't be super surprised to see the U.S. Actually let other people experiment for an extended period of time and discover the fact that maybe it's time for us to actually loosen our grip on the financial system a little bit, and see, one, if Bitcoin can actually work as maybe not federal tender, but as a sort of secondary financial system underpinning everything. And then two, if Bitcoin were to have that much pressure put on it, and I were the federal government, I'd want to see how that performed. And worst case scenario, it fails, and I let you come crawling back to me, begging for my CBDC that we've launched, now that we've seen all of the issues that Currency X had. That seems like a nice strategic play to me, but maybe I've read too much Oliver Scott Card.
No, I actually think that you might be right, because when you look at the world right now, the world is deglobalizing. We had hit peak globalization, and with the fight with Russia, the deglobalization basically set in. And America is perfectly positioned for that world, right? You're energy independent, you're food independent, you got all the tech, you got all the weaponry, you got a big moat to protect your country. You're way, way ahead of the curve. It's almost like you saw the curve.
That moat is so important. The moat is huge.
True.
Actually, I watched a YouTube video of somebody theoretically saying, let's say the entire world decided to try and invade the US. How would that roll out militarily, given what we know about different countries' militaries and whatnot? And the fact that we're not landlocked and don't have any significant military powers directly next to us is just a military landfall, so to speak. It's everything to the military significance that we have.
And you also already have a space defense force, so even in that arena, you're take ahead of the competition. So basically, America doesn't have to take draconian measures as other countries will have to in what's coming, right? Because you could say, in a deglobalized world, especially if you're in Europe, for example, we're not energy independent, we're not food independent, we are not protected by a moat. We're completely hopeless continent in that regard, bordered by an angry neighbor. By now, very angry neighbor. So over here, a CBDC would make a lot of sense, right? To keep things in check, to identify Russian spies or sick people or migrants crossing borders, or you got countless excuses to roll out a CBDC or the environment, or take your pick, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. And as we look at,
My fault.
No,
I
no,
think
no,
we got a
go
little bit of
Style.
lag. I keep getting over you a little bit. I was just going to
That's
say,
okay. No, we're
obviously
good.
we've seen tyranny build very, very quickly in Europe. It is interesting that it can be such a hotbed that way with so many countries with direct borders. With the start of the world wars, just Germany rolls through a whole country all of a sudden, and nobody really has time to react to that. Whereas with the U.S., we've got the moat. It gives us at least some time to prepare for things like that, or to react to things like that. So is that something that is thick in the air there right now? Is the conflicts and the potentiality for, I'll knock on wood, World War III, but those types of violent conflicts?
Well, not to go too far off track with CBDCs, but yeah, we do at least I worry about that kind of conflict, but that gets into a whole it's sort of related, but it's also not related directly, at least. But yeah, I see the potential for escalation of this conflict is really huge, and I think America is also in that regard very well positioned in case that happens. But yeah, we do, but it won't be Germany, and it won't be France,
Sure, yeah.
and it won't be England. It will come from, I think, unexpected places.
Yeah.
But
So
I think that goes back
we-
to the fear question, right, with CBDCs. So I'm sorry, Paul, I'll hand it back off to you, and I will stop creating tangents for us to go down.
No, you're good. Like you said, we have a little bit of a delay. Go ahead and finish your statement, because I'm doing one thing real fast. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'm mostly curious about the perspective, because I have certain values and things, and y'all know that I really nerd out about value systems and whatnot. But a lot of my values are kind of specific to my geography in a big way, because I was born with an American flag in my hand. My family is very patriotic and very pro freedom and liberty and all the pursuit of happiness and all of the things that our forefathers believed in. So I'm looking to the future, going, how do we preserve that? How do we keep those ideals alive? And that's my big argument against CBDCs. Is CBDCs just don't seem particularly American to me in a big way. Bitcoin actually seems really American to me, which is maybe a little bit odd, but I guess that's per the name of the show, right? Bitcoin is freedom.
Yeah, but I think sort of picking up where what I was saying before, it's like America is very well sort of positioned to basically also create a space for Bitcoin to work. It could become like a big El Salvador, even, right? Because if the whole world turns into a prison camp, America could basically be the odd one out, right? And an experiment with freedom, because it is sort of sealed off in a way, so it can sort of export all the misery all over the world and import all the good stuff, which is basically what they're doing.
Yeah,
Right.
And
we've done for some time.
Yeah, and I guess if you're, and that's probably also the whole problem with CBDCs, right? If you can do that, why wouldn't you do that, right? If you're in the position to export all the misery, import all the good stuff, why wouldn't you do that, right? So, and that's the problem with people making decisions, is that's always how people operate, right? They will always export all the bad stuff to other people and import all the good. I mean, luckily there's also good people out there, but the majority of people tend to think that way, and especially in a geopolitical game theory setting, right? That's usually what happens. So, but if you can manipulate the money to work for you in that way, you will do that, right? Why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that doesn't necessarily eventually play itself out. But on the next slide, we'll look at countries that are in fact in focus for right now. This is the news that was curated pretty much for the last week or two. But we're seeing China news come up. We're seeing India, Hong Kong, Canada. All four of these are playing with CBDCs to some shape, form, or fashion. And I've sort of refreshed it. I don't know if you were to refresh your slides, but anyway, we do it now, we do it later. There is going to be a link to the conversation we had the last time, because I still do some updating to that. But on that particular document, we looked at some of the use cases for CBDCs, and it was stimulus checks, welfare program, cross-border surveillance, preventing money laundering, right? I think they're going to have a lot of reasons as to why, having a CBDC is good. And toward the end of this, you're going to see a video from IMF sort of talk about that. But on this China one, you can see the activities, and I sort of have some of the India stuff looped in there, but we can sort of disregard that. But with China specifically, the Bank of China, the digital yuan transaction volume costs $14 billion. We're seeing their CBDC mature in a way that we're going to really see what a CBDC is able to do. And they actually had the first digital yuan land transfer executed in Chinese province of Fujian, I guess that's the way you pronounce it. So as you can see, China is continuing to move forward with their CBDC. It seems like things right now are on track and that it hasn't been too crazy yet. But we know, and one of the fears that a lot of people have is that while it might start out okay, what will they ultimately be able to do? And we'll hear some more about that as we look at the IMF. If you go to the next slide, we'll look at the next few of the countries. India is next, and I need to edit that slide, but I didn't. But anyway, in India, they've released a 50-page report on CBDC, and is it good or is it bad for the country's crypto? And what I think you're going to see is a lot of these places, specifically even here in the US, there's a lot of effort going in to get their minds around this technology. And we haven't seen much come out into the fact only China has really rolled out a solid CBDC. As you can see here, India Central Bank, they're planning to soon launch a CBDC pilot. And then they hope that a CBDC can combat crypto threat. And but they also have firms that are opposing the CBDC as well. So across the globe, is there some mastermind behind all this? I'm not sure. I think that we're seeing an evolution of this whole CBDC industry. And will someone ultimately take control of it? I don't know. But right now, I know that from what the news is telling us, there's a lot of studying, there's a lot of trials, there's a lot of pilots going on, and they're trying to get their hands around it. As we look at Canada, the next slide, their central bank has identified a retail CBDC archetype. In theory, heavy analysis is that for theirs. And then the last one is Hong Kong. They've unveiled a completed retail CBDC project that has a CBDC-backed stablecoin. So these are some of the countries, and this is what's sort of going on when you start looking at it. It's like, wow. And this is only a tip of the countries on that link to the one that we did last week. Mm-hmm. There was everybody. I mean, Hong Kong, Thailand, United Arab Emirates, Australia, Singapore, Malaysia, South Africa, Bank of Ghana, right? Saudi Arabia, you name the country. Everyone's trying to figure this thing out, and they're working to move toward that. So I don't know if you guys have any comments on the countries or not, but.
Well, I mean, you don't have to have an evil mastermind behind the scenes pulling the strings for other countries to develop CBDCs, right? I mean, the potential there is enormous. Also to do good. I mean, I guess, you could also theoretically do good stuff with CBDCs. But yeah, especially, of course, for surveillance, control, or put your favorite people in spots of power and keep them in power, right? I mean, you can do anything with the CBDC.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. On the next slide, we look globally, and this is what you guys had mentioned before. The IMF is the evil empire, so to speak, but the IMF, they've touts programmable and controllable CBDCs for financial inclusions. And the next slide after, don't move there yet, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then you look at SWIFT. Now, if any of you are familiar with the SWIFT system, this is the system that allows global interaction with money, right? This is how money transfers country to country. Whole nine yards. They did a trial demonstrating how a global CBDC network could become reality. And there was a lot of coverage, as you can see from a lot of the crypto publications that was covering this story. On the next slide, the IMF's view of CBDC. Nick, I don't know if you'll be able to do it or not, if you can play it, but skip to like 18 minutes. I think it was 18. Yeah, I think it was. If we were to skip to 18 minutes into this, Bo, I remember his name. It's the little guy, I think at 18 minutes. If we can play this and listen to this conversation, it's not that long. It's very interesting.
In particular, that CBDC is potentially so well designed to address?
Thank you, Kathleen, for that question. The way we see it, CBDC has the potential to break barriers, to improve financial inclusion, at least in three aspects. The first aspect is that it can lower the hurdle for using money substantially for several groups. One group is those people without bank account. And another group will be those people without smartphone, because CBDC does not even require smartphone. Actually, the third group that CBDC can potentially help is those people without internet access, without phone, because CBDC can be stored in a store value card. So these are the potential group of people that CBDC can help. The second aspect that CBDC can help improve financial inclusion is because of its legal tender status. Because CBDC is an obligation of Central Bank. And the obligation of Central Bank is a legal tender in every country. So it is widely accepted. That creates potential value for everyone to use it. And finally, the third way we think CBDC can improve financial inclusion is through what we call programmability. That is, CBDC can allow government agencies and private sector players to program, to create smart contracts, to allow targeted policy functions. For example, welfare payment. For example, consumption coupon. For example, food stamp. By programming CBDC, those money can be precisely targeted for what kind of people can own and what kind of use this money can be utilized, for example, for food. So this potential programmability can help government agencies to precisely target their support to those people who need support. So that way can also improve financial inclusion. Of course, I want to end with a caveat, because CBDC is not a panacea. CBDC cannot solve every challenge in financial inclusion. There are some aspects of financial inclusion is not related to technology. For example, financial literacy, digital literacy. So CBDC has to work with other policies together to try to improve financial inclusion. I stop here. Thank you.
Vera, this is a good place for you to...
Well, it's kind of funny that he also mentions financial literacy. Because I think the last thing they want to do is educate people on financial literacy as it regards to CBDCs.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot to be said there. But yeah, I mean, and I'll say this, and I'll definitely both of you guys chime in, because I do want your thoughts and views on everything he said. But one thing that I do believe, and again, people don't shoot me for this. I know I'm going to sound really horrible here, but there is a need at some level, and I think technology can help create efficiencies in some of these government programs. One of the things that does frustrate me is with the way that some of these programs are built, like welfare and like food stamps, stuff like this. People have gained those systems, they use those systems, and they take advantage of those systems. With something like this, they can't, right? You take that out and it creates a very efficient type of a program. And I think that what's going to happen is that what we have to realize is that people use different money is used all kinds of ways. Like there's a welfare program. Listen, I'm not on welfare, so I don't have to worry about a CBDC like that for welfare because I'm not being impacted by that. And I know people might say, well, hey, that's great for you, but what about the people that are and they have to deal with it? But in this case, I think it would be good, the fact that you say, hey, here's $500 for you to buy food. You can't use this $500 to buy alcohol with it. That's just the way it is. It's programmed that way, and you have to use it for what it's used for. Now, will it still stop me from selling my CBDC that's for food to someone else and they get money for it? Not if you program it so that they can't, you see? And again, maybe that's way too big brothers. I'll stop there. I'm sure you guys will have views on that, but I think it was interesting what he said.
You want to take it, Pigeon?
Yeah, sure. I've got two big points. One is I have certain red flag words that I use to identify particular ideologies, and inclusion is one of those. It's a red flag to me when people talk about inclusion because it's a buzzword in a set of ideologies that I disagree with wholeheartedly. To me, it's double speak for like you'd hear somebody say, well, we have to do this for the children. Well, you can't argue against me now because I referenced children. And now if you speak out against me and my plan, then you hate kids. And that's not allowed. And it's like, no. I'm not saying we shouldn't include people. I'm just saying you using inclusion as a nice benevolent word to cover up a long list of things that could potentially go very, very wrong, very, very fast doesn't excuse you implementing those things. And the other big point I'd like to make is he's listing off all of these convenience items that to me, like, okay, so if as he's listing these things, I'm going, wait, I don't know if he's trying to sell me on CBDCs or give me a list of reasons why I don't want to participate. Because that's what it is. It's like, we'll be able to control whether or not you can use your money for food, or we'll be able to control whether or not you can invest in certain things. Isn't that great? I'm like, no, it's not great. That's exactly what I want to stay away from. I don't understand your argument. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and when I hear inclusion, I hear you can't get out, right?
Yeah,
it's like we're all in it together. There's no exit.
Yeah, we are burning this ship to the ground. Come with us.
Yeah. So I totally agree with what you just said, and I think coming back to financial literacy, I think one of the key things. I think I also mentioned that last time when you sort of have to explain what Bitcoin is and what cryptocurrency is. One of the things that you have to explain is what is money, right? What is money? And this isn't money. Like it's in no shape or form is it anything like money. It's basically the death of money. A CBDC system would be the end of money as we know it, because it's basically a point system. And you would have to trust a central authority that they won't game it. And you have to trust them on their word that they won't do it and on their track record. And I mean, it's like, I mean, it's almost like a no-brainer, right? I mean, what you said, Paul, you're right. I mean, but I would say let the private sector do that kind of stuff, right? You could hire some kind of, I don't know, Cardano or whatever, some other player to make food stamps for the public, and they can use that system if they, want to do that. But if you do put it in the hands of the government or central banks, I mean, you're basically handing over the keys to the kingdom, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's going to happen, though, I think that you're going to see that it's not a this or that, it's a this and that, right? So when I look at it, because to get every business to pay their employees in a CBDC that's programmable probably won't happen. Here's what I believe will happen. I think that government programs probably will be run with CBDC type money. There will be accounts set up so that people in the event that the government needed to do something, they could, and that particular amount of money will be controlled and handled. But that doesn't mean that's all of your money, right? I think we'll still have the ability to own Bitcoin. We'll still have the ability to own other assets, things of that nature. This will have a function for those people who are dependent upon government resources in order to get assistance and help from them. That's what I'm assuming, because I don't see a system where every company, every business is going to start issuing CBDCs that are programmable to people. If I get a salary from a company and you pay me, or if I'm an entrepreneur and I bill you as a customer, that means you're going to pay me with a programmable money that I can only do X with, that the government has control over. I don't think it works that way. So it's tricky, right? And I think we're watching a natural evolution, because even back in the day when the greenbacks came into existence, people died. Why? Because they did not greenbacks. They said, this is evil. We don't want this. And the system is still here today. I think you're seeing natural evolution.
Well, but you also saw what happened eventually with the greenback, right? We're now at the end of that experiment, and so the question is, each time the stakes get raised, right? And I think we're nearing the point that you cannot make. You run the risk that you make a mistake and you can't make any more mistakes after that one, right? It will be our final mistake that we can make, and that's how I see it. Because also, take for example, let's say China has gone all in with CBDCs. I mean, technically they're still in pilot phase. They haven't rolled it out all over China, but it's pretty far advanced, and of course they're gonna do that. So what you have is like money that the government controls, or the central bank, or basically it's, in China it's all one and the same thing. And then it becomes impossible for opposition to organize, to do anything. Any political opponent will be snuffed out at the beginning, right? You won't have any way to sort of get Xi Jinping out of power anymore once you got like a CBDC, because every transaction that you do is completely visible. Every transaction with whoever you sort of interact, they can just take it out of your wallet directly. You would have no money, right? So it's an extremely powerful weapon. And it's impossible to regulate, right, on that level.
Yeah. And that's what that goes back to, saying that, and again, I have to make correction my last statement. I think, will there be digital dollars, digital ones, digital? Yeah, I think all that stuff goes digital. And can it be programmable? I think it can be programmable only on certain aspects of it, because like you said, if I'm in a position to where I need to receive money from the government, that aspect will be controlled by the government. But other areas, not so much. It's sort of like what we have today, right? The US dollar and all the other currencies in the world are issued by governments. That's just what they do. They don't have the ability to control it, because once they set it out in the freedom, then it's gone. This is what we want with Bitcoin, right? If they were to take the Bitcoin standard, then they could not, print more. They couldn't do any of that stuff. They lose the control over the money, and they can't program it the way that they would want to do. But, and again, I guess it's a tricky system, but I struggle to see the future where we will have these governments that have control over the entire money system, and that we become robots and have to do what they say. Style?
Have you ever heard the song 16 Tons?
I don't think
There's an old, so I'm from the Appalachian Mountains, and I consider them to be very much home. I have Irish roots, and there's a lot of history there. And there's a song called 16 Tons. I forget who wrote it, but it says,
it's written by Merle Travis.
Yeah, okay,
about a coal mine.
So you move 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. He then says, St. Peter, don't you call me. I can't go to heaven because I owe my soul to the company's stove. That would be the company's store, for those of you that aren't from the Appalachian Mountains. And what he's talking about is the coal mining companies back in the day actually issued their own currencies. And you would get paid in the coal company's dollar, essentially. But the only place that you could spend that dollar was at the company's store. But they were actually paying them significantly less than a living wage. So then what the company store said was, okay, that's no problem. We'll actually lend you some credits, right? We'll supply your food and your everything based on credit. Well, now the song is about this guy who he can't even die because he's so in debt to the company store. The only thing he can do is mine, and every day he goes to mine to try and pay off his debts, but he can't get out from under that debt because he's making less money than he would need to actually catch up on the debts. And I
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it does. It does. And that's some of the old wisdom that came out of the rednecks of Appalachia. I think it has been lost. And not that I think that we should listen to a bunch of coal miners on our philosophical debates or anything. That's not what I'm saying. But there is some wisdom in the like the outlaw and the company man. They've learned things through experience that we can still use today. And I think that if we did end up implementing CBDCs, whether it's soon or later, that we're going to end up with a company store situation. And that's why I'm so concerned is I have these my ancestors, I think, in the back of my mind, speaking to me adamantly in some sense that I'm sorry, I'm getting a little woo-woo, but it feels like their eyes are on me to not fall prey to that which they did.
Yeah. Well, I think your ancestors are right.
Yeah. That's sort of what we're doing right on this show, and that's sort of what we do in the world of Bitcoin, is that we're saying Bitcoin is freedom. Bitcoin gets us out of these types of systems and also out of these types of concerns. And this is what I always tell people, is that as long as you hold and you own Bitcoin, the rest of this stuff, for the most part, you don't have to worry about, right? If you're holding Bitcoin, are you really concerned a lot about the whole CBDC system? The only way I would be concerned about that is if, for some reason, they completely outlawed Bitcoin, was able to shut Bitcoin down, which we believe that Bitcoin is decentralized, censorship-resistant technology. So as long as I own this digital scarce censorship type of money, then my wealth is going to be retained, and I don't have to necessarily worry about a CBDC type system, unless, again, we run some parallel system where I have to operate outside of the world system because I want to get things done the way I want to. And I think that might be possible, and that's might be what we'll wind up with. But this is why I believe Bitcoin is freedom, and people need to own it.
Well, to come back on your earlier point, will Bitcoin do fine? I think it will, right? It doesn't matter for Bitcoin if they roll out CBDCs or not. In the end, it will survive, and I think it will even flourish under a CBDC system, because I think those CBDC systems need Bitcoin to operate, right? Because they're like ultimately manipulatable. You need something to set a standard and to hold that standard, right? In a world where everything is fake, you need something that sort of keeps track of reality, right? So Bitcoin will be the center of any such system. But I do worry, right, for individuals, if they do hold Bitcoin. Let's say if you hold Bitcoin, but the majority of the people in Amsterdam, for example, all live on CBDCs, or if the whole of the Netherlands is in the CBDC system, these people will be very pro-government in a very short time, and they will do whatever the government sets out to do, right? And of course, at first they'll probably do nice things and advertise it in a nice way, but eventually, they say like, oh, why does Nicholas have so much Bitcoin? What kind of hoarder of wealth is that person, right? What kind of Scrooge kind of person is that, right? So you can do all sorts of ugly things once you get control of the majority, and I think you can take control of the majority. And for example, in a country like Sweden, most of it is already cashless, right? And in Europe, a lot of countries are way advanced with cashless payments systems. And if you put an E in front of the euro, the e-euro or whatever, people think like, oh, well, whatever, right? We already had digital currency, so it's just an E in front of the euro. So they don't recognize the danger there, right? Right. For us, we know the danger, but if you walk outside of the door and you talk about CBDCs, people think you're crazy, right?
Right.
Yeah, 100%.
No, it's true. It's true. And that is what this is why we do what we do. It's why we try to spread the information we spread, is because it's to help people understand that you have options. And this is what I want to impress upon people outside of Bitcoin, in Bitcoin personal development period. Guys, listen, you always have a choice. You might not like the natural consequences of those choices, but you have a choice. You can move where you want to move, go where you need to go. I hear people say, oh, but I can't. Yes, you can. It might take you a while. It might take you doing some things you don't want to do. But if you really, really want it, you can get whatever you want to do in this world. And Bitcoin is one of the ways that help us get there faster, I believe. Right now, people don't understand. I tell them, guys, listen, remember all the hoo-ha when Bitcoin was 69,000? Bitcoin right now is trading around 19. And some people think it can go to 16, 15, 14, 12. Okay, if it does, you should be all tuned in and locked in at this moment, because this is when you have the chance to do something you haven't been able to do before because it was so high. You got a $50,000 discount sitting in front of you. If you don't take it, that's on you. I'm sorry. And you can't say, well, I didn't know. We were telling you all the whole way around. People will look back and they'll be like, oh, you guys are lucky. No, it's not luck. We had to slog through this ridiculous time frame with Bitcoin. We didn't know what was going to happen. But now Bitcoin's back up to 70,000, 100,000, 250, a million. That's freedom, right? If people can't get that, I'm sorry, Jan.
But I also see this moment, this excellent discount price for Bitcoin also coincides with incredible inflation and hardship. I hear people around me constantly complaining like that, the majority of their paycheck is going to food, to all kinds of expenses, why they can spend it on luxury items or other things that they used to spend it on. So it sort of coincides with people having very low cash. So that's I think a problem, and but I also think what I think it's people have a moral obligation actually to sort of promote Bitcoin, right, or actually sound money in whatever form it is. But I think Bitcoin is where the fight is. It's the center of the fight. So I think that all the good people out there and everybody sort of who feels the same way as we do, that we have sort of a moral obligation to go out there and to convince as many people as we can to spend as much money as they can spare without getting into trouble on buying Bitcoin. At least that's how I see it.
Style was smiling. I don't know if he had a comment because he had a big grin, or if you just said something that resonated with him.
No, I think you're just resonating with me. I like, so my family is a little bit, we're pretty tight. Our family's very close. And we have an investment strategy as a family. My parents are not interested in Bitcoin. They don't know anything about crypto. They're like, nope. Not interested. So we actually sat down and had a meeting essentially, and they run their own business and everything, and have done fairly well for themselves. And so we sat down and said, okay, look, I'm me, StyledPigeon. I'm going to invest in this area because I've been doing a lot of research, and I think that this is the way to go. I think that 20 years down the road, if everything hits the fan, so to speak, you're going to come to me and be very, very grateful as a family that I did that research and that I was invested so heavily. And so my father was like, that's perfect. Yep. You keep doing that. We're going to keep doing what we're doing on this side of things, more, what we're traditionally used to, and we'll see how things play out. And I do think, diversification is really important, just from a, sound finance perspective. But I also am of the opinion that Bitcoin's going to be what remains in the end. I just think that it unlocks the governmental power that has been such a deadly natural force in the past and gives the mass majority of that back to the population. And I think that's where it should probably be. And I'm actually curious, Nick, what you mean when you said that you think we have a moral obligation. What or who or how is that dictated as being a moral obligation? Could you lay that out for me a little bit more?
Well, I think when you look at the world as it is right now, and where it's headed, I think the only real way to restore balance is to create a different incentive structure, right? I think people haven't realized that, the power of money. So first of all, what is money, of course, but, even if you have a certain type of money, it exerts power. It's an incentive system that sort of operates invisibly upon us, and we sort of follow its rules without even being aware or fully aware of those rules. And right now we have seen that you can sort of manipulate those rules, and maybe they do it with the best intentions, but we see where it's where something like that is headed. So I think we have the obligation to restore order in our world by adopting sound measures that cannot be manipulated and are outside of the control of people who would like to do it with the best intentions or the worst intentions. I mean, basically we now have the possibility to adopt a kind of money that is outside of the reach of anybody. And I think that's how it should be, right? If you play a game like Monopoly or whatever game it is, you want to play a game where the rules are sort of followed, right, by everyone playing the game. But if you got someone playing the bank and he's putting like money in his own pocket, nobody wants to play that game, right?
Right.
At some time that board game is going to fly through the room. So that's our moral obligation, that we create a game where everybody has equal chances to win. And we can only do that by adopting a sound money system. So that's why I see it as a moral obligation to give everybody a fair chance and to make sure that nobody can manipulate the game. And one more thing, to come back on my earlier points, with people now having less money to spend to buy Bitcoin, which is of course a shame because it's so much discounted at the same time. You also have the psychological thing going on where people say, oh my God, they thought it was going to 100K and now it's going down to 0, right? So now nobody wants to buy it while it's on a discount, right? So that's also something that's going on at the same time, which is very hard to, to tell them that it's going back up and that it's like a natural cycle and it's completely normal.
Clip that. That was an awesome segment.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, as we wrap this show up, I want to, and this is a great segue into another point that I want to make. Folks, listen, and if you take nothing else from this entire show, please take these last minutes to heart. Nick brought up a great point. This right now is a hard economic time for a lot of people. People are struggling because of high inflation and the condition of where the world is in. But here's what most people fail to realize. Even in these hard economic times, there are people getting incredibly wealthy. Why? They're creating value and they're making a difference. They're creating value and making a difference. If you find a way to create value and make a difference, and depending on what you put into the hour, because a lot of people were stuck in the, I get paid X amount of dollars per hour. Well, if a person's getting paid $15 an hour, which is minimum wage in some places, why can't you make 30? Why can't you make 80? Why can't you make $500 an hour? Either because you feel in your mind, I don't have the skills necessary to make $500 an hour, then I challenge you to go get the skills so you can make $500 an hour. It's not going to happen today. It might happen a year from now. It might happen 5 years from now. But if 5 years from now, you're not making exponentially more than you're making today, something's wrong on your side, not the government side and not any other corporation side. It's because you fail to go find the skills that pay you more, right? Rather it's your desire, rather it's just you feel like you can do it. You can do it. I promise you can do it. I started minimum wage. I'm not making minimum wage now. Why? Because I work really, really hard all the time to keep myself finding a way to create value and make a difference. Now, number two, Andreas Antonopoulos said this. It is better to earn Bitcoin than to buy Bitcoin. Folks, there are so many ways. This doesn't exist in the fiat system. You have so many ways to earn Bitcoin. If you don't earn Bitcoin, shame on you. It has nothing to do with the government. This is on you. RoundlyX is out there. Lolly's out there. There's so many ways for you to use, earn, have Bitcoin. I don't know what to tell you if you don't do it. Listen, affiliate program, Strike will give you $5 if you turn on somebody to Strike and they get it and they sign up, and guess what? They get $5, you get $5. You do that for 100 people, that's $500. You keep going exponentially. You got a lot of money coming from Strike just to get them on board. Coinbase has done it. Kraken has done it. All of these companies are telling you, if you onboard people, we will pay you. Earn your Bitcoin. Don't buy it so you don't have to. And in addition to that, keep finding little ways to stack sats. Folks, there's ways. I don't care if you're putting $1, $5, $10. You today might think it's nothing. It's a lot, because if Bitcoin does what we think Bitcoin's going to do, and that's go to $1 million like some of these people keep touting in crypto media, if it ever makes it to $1 million, that little Bitcoin you have is going to be some money. It's not going to be a lot. As I told Altcoin Daily, they said if you have 0.28 Bitcoin, you're going to, okay, 0.28 Bitcoin, if it reaches $1 million, it's about $280,000. Okay, it's good. You know, will it last you for the rest of your life? I don't know what you would do with it, but it's a money, right? 0.28 Bitcoin today would cost you, I think it was like $4,000 or something like that, or somewhere around that. I can't remember, my math might be off. But even that might be a large number for some people, but build up to it. It was Charlie Lee, who said, he created Litecoin. He said, everyone should work to own one Bitcoin before you own anything else. Take that to heart and do that. I'm telling you guys, Bitcoin is freedom. If you have Bitcoin, you do not have to worry, and you do not have to feel like the government's going to control you. Why? Because your wealth is in Bitcoin. And what we all say, what? Time is money. Well, if time is money, Bitcoin being money is going to give you your time back. This is what we got to understand with Bitcoin. So if you guys do that for me, I would appreciate it. So if take nothing else,
Amen.
take that.
Tried to make the spirit move up in this place.
And I want to add one more thing. What I always say is, Bitcoin decentralizes people. And I think that's very important in this day and age that we live in, where people tend to operate in groups and think in groups, which is really stupid. Bitcoin decentralizes your thinking, it decentralizes you, it takes you out of the group, it gives you independence, and that is like a real benefit to society as a whole.
It really is. No, it's great. So, hey, guys, I don't want to take up your time. I know your time's valuable. Folks who have been listening, thank you so much for watching the Bitcoin's Freedom Show. I'm starting to get myself back on my groove. Hopefully, I'll be able to produce my show on Thursday, which is Bitcoin and Politics. We're getting closer and closer to the midterm elections in the U.S. It is absolutely exciting. Who's going to control Congress is definitely on the table. This thing is by the day. Sometimes people feel like it's the Democrats. Sometimes people feel like it's the Republicans. Well, not so much the Democrats. They think that the Democrats will retain the Senate, but they'll still not control the House. And so Biden still has a little bit of wiggle room. But if it's a red wave, Biden can forget about it. We're not going to get anything done in the U.S. for the next 2 years until we get our next major election. So if you're in the U.S., please, please, please tune into the stuff with politics. I know us Bitcoiners, we hate government and we hate politics, but you have to sort of deal with it. Well, you don't have to. You can opt out. But my hope is that some of you will tune in enough and vote for some of these people, because I think some of these people will help make the U.S. a better place with Bitcoin. Even there's a lot of really pro-Bitcoin people in Congress, and so that's going to be good. And then I'll be back the following with another Bitcoin's Freedom Show. And I, again, thank Nick so much for producing the shows. He has made it super easy. I was very reluctant to do this, very reluctant. Me and Nick had a lot of conversations about this. He was twisting my arm left and right, and now I'm super happy that he did. So thanks again, Bitcoin Live, for sponsoring these shows. Or making them possible. I appreciate it.
And RoundlyX for sponsoring.
So with that, yes, and definitely RoundlyX. Guys, please go sign up RoundlyX. Use Bitcoin as freedom. Get your $4 in Bitcoin. There you go. Get your $4 in Bitcoin. It might not sound like a lot today, but tomorrow, Bitcoin. Hey, and Bitcoin's pumping right now, guys. We're at 19.5. We're pushing toward 20K. Remember when we all celebrated when it got to 20K? We were going crazy. Yeah, it's going to 20K. All right, you guys got any last comments?
It feels differently.
It does feel different.
CBDCs.
Yes, no CBDCs. That's for sure. And one last thing, and I'll let you guys go. One last thing. Please watch the Gingerly show. Please go watch the Gingerly. Pigeon and Don John does a great job with that show. I'm guilty. I had not watched the episode yet, but I'm watching as soon as I get done here. But you guys make sure you tune into Gingerly as well.
We appreciate it. It was a really fun one, actually. We had Kieran on. We talked about AI and commerce and all that. So, and NFTs too. So,
yeah, you rocked it.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Go, guys.
Y'all have a great
Thanks
one.
a lot.